So I had interviewed at two different companies before getting my role. The first one was a set of two interviews, basically interviewing with a BDR manager and then with the general sales team manager,
Mhm.
as well as another manager. And then at the second company, it was again a series of two interviews. One with my direct manager, who's going to be above me, and then the global sales director.
Part 3, interview tips. Something that's really important that you do anytime you're interviewing is just try to find something in common with the person who's interviewing you right off the bat. Once you land an interview, how do you know what to expect? What's going to happen next? Well, let me talk about it with you. You can expect somewhere between 2 and 4 interviews to happen over the course of the next 2 weeks to a month. And that sort of depends on what people's schedules are like. Usually on the company side they are interviewing with. If they're really tight on their calendars, it might take a little longer. Usually the first interview is with a recruiter in HR from that company. Second interview is oftentimes with the hiring manager. The third interview can be with a peer usually, so someone you'd be working alongside with. And if you have a fourth interview, it's usually with a higher up, a VP or an executive in the company. And that's usually because they have some sort of policy that they don't want to hire jerks and they need to make sure that every single new employee talks to someone high up in the company. By the way, this is part 3 of a 4-part series on getting into software sales without a degree and without any experience at all. Part 1 covers some helpful LinkedIn tips, and part 2 covers getting interviews and setting yourself apart. I've linked both of those videos in the description down below. Also, this video could not have been made without the help of my friend Chris. He just got hired as an SDR for the first time. He has no experience at all, and he just got a job offer. So please show him some love for helping out and go and like this video. He's going to be watching and he's going to be impressed to see how many likes this video actually gets. Also, if you have questions for him directly, go down to his LinkedIn. It's in the description down below. You can message him there. If you're interested in furthering your sales experience, I've also linked some really good sales books. So one of them specifically called New Sales Simplified is one I highly recommend if you're learning to get into that sales mindset. Go down there in the description and check that book out.
It was things like, I've been working at this restaurant for 3 months. I was like, oh, due to COVID. He's like, oh, I've been to that restaurant. I actually ordered there for New Year's. And I was like, oh, cool. What'd you have for dinner? Do you remember? And we talked a little bit about that. I mean, it's just finding like commonalities. In my second interview, the person on the other side wasn't actually from the city that I'm in. He was from Boston, but I went there last year. And so we got a chance to talk about that a little bit. And I told them some of the places that stood out in my mind when I was there. And, things like that, just things to get them out, do a pattern break. You have to understand that if they're hiring for an SDR role, they're interviewing a lot of people.
Yeah.
For this job, they had something like well over 100 interviews. And if you're able to pattern break the person on the other side, that is really going to make you stand out in their minds, as opposed to, being locked in, okay, so why do you want to do sales? What brought you here? How'd you find out about us?
The reason why you want to do this is because it is one of the fastest ways to build rapport with someone you've never spoken to before. I can think back of times where I spoke about things that were going on, current events that were affecting both of us. I actually interviewed one time. I'm from New Hampshire, and the person I was interviewing with was from Vermont. We were both in California. That sort of stuff. How can you find out what you have in common and just ask and start talking about that?
It was funny. In the initial interview, you're just kind of like really shooting the shit. You're just talking, oh, the weather sucks. This is COVID world,
Yeah.
just starting up a conversation, building that rapport. And then I use that kind of as a springboard to outline why I am there on the other side of the camera with them.
Yeah.
So basically, oh yeah, the current situation in my city of COVID is this, and this actually brings me to why I want to make this transition into sales.
It's also very helpful to show that you can do that because you'll need to do that in software sales. Next, you really just want to make sure that you are being yourself in the interview process and allowing yourself and the other person to go off script a little bit.
One thing that really was communicated to me from my manager now was that I got him off script. I was able to get him away from his notepad and engaged into the conversation, which I think had a huge role in setting me apart from everything, because he left. He's like, listen, I had all these questions prepared, and really you just kind of like hit all the notes without me having to ask you anything. So I think that really volunteering that information rather than being prompted for it kind of sets you aside, and being able to build that conversation naturally and tell that story.
When people go to interview a new candidate, they typically bring a list of questions. These questions are usually a backup. They want to make sure that the time is well spent, that they don't freeze up while interviewing a candidate, and that they walk away with some tangible, useful information from having asked questions. But that doesn't mean most of the time that those are the only things you can talk about. You can lead this conversation. You can show what's important to you and show that you're interesting. And before you know it, you may end up talking about all sorts of stuff. The person who interviews that way is way more likely to get a thumbs up.
One thing that constantly had come up with the people interviewing me was that they had, on the other side, after having a conversation with me, really felt my passion for hospitality. Like, I love bartending. I love serving. I entered into 2020 with the goal to enter into a fine dining establishment and become one of the best cocktail bartenders in the city. Obviously, that goal didn't really pan out to fruition. I did end up getting a job at a really, really nice place, but unfortunately, just COVID just had different plans. I really focused on showing them that passion for the hospitality aspect of it. And one thing that they kept on rewinding to was saying, well, what happens when the world goes back to normal? Are you going to go back to bartending or serving? This was a big concern for a lot of them, because they're thinking like maybe 7 months down the line, the guy, hits a wall on his sales or something, and he just quits on us and go back to bartending. And that's something that I really had to focus on doing the selling of. And that's the thing, is that when you're doing these interviews,